Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. My name is Caspian Thompson. I'm an honor student at Washington State University, and I had a question. How do dogs see the world? And how does it compare to our human experience? Well, as it turns out, this is a very fascinating and well-researched topic, and in this video I will give an overview of the current state of this science. I'll be focusing on three main senses that we can all relate to: the sense of smell, sense of sight, and sense of hearing. Let's get right into it. You might not be surprised to learn that smell is one of the most important senses that dogs have, arguably the single most important. Just by observing them and the way they act, we have an intuitive gut sense that they rely heavily on their sense of smell. After all, they'll pull us around when we give them walks, they'll go try to sniff the side of pads, they'll sniff, they'll put their nose up in the air, a lot of sniffing. And we can see that and we can infer that that's something that's important to them. But exactly how powerful is that sense of smell? It's not like we can normally smell whatever it is that they're smelling, right? So what does research say on exactly how dogs smell? Well, it turns out their sense of smell is incredibly powerful. So much so that it can be used to detect diseases. To demonstrate this, I'll just give a case study in the form of a double-blind clinical trial at Germany's Darmstadt Hospital that Fiel et al. Performed back in 2021. They used a 7-year-old golden retriever that had been trained in lab conditions to respond when it identified the scent of a cancerous sample. It was then introduced to both the breath and urine samples from hundreds of patients, which comprised both a completely healthy control group and a set of known cancer patients. Ultimately, with just the breath samples, the dog was about 78% accurate and about 88% accurate with just the urine. But if you take both methods together, the dog had an accuracy of an astonishing 98%. So this trial strongly supported the potential feasibility of employing sniffer dogs to detect cancer. This is especially useful because this particular kind of cancer is incredibly hard to detect with traditional means. And as far as the sense of smell, that's certainly not something we can do with our sense of smell, and we've had a very hard time replicating this type of capability with machinery, even in the age of AI. So, it's safe to say that dogs have a very powerful sense of smell. But how does this sense of smell compare with their wild ancestors, wolves, or for that matter, their wild relatives? Well, this is the question that Mutin et al. Sought to answer in their 2022 study. Essentially, they compared both the genetic and morphological traits of olfaction across different breeds of dogs and different species of canine. Now, before I go any further, I'll define some terms. Morphological just means physical traits, like stuff that you can see. It's like the shape of the dog's head or their body. And olfaction is just a fancy word for a dog's ability to smell. They used two main metrics to quantify this. One was the copy count for functional OR genes, which are essentially genes that relate directly to a dog's sense of smell. And the second was what they called RelCP, or the relative surface area of the cribriform plate and the skull. The cribriform plate is essentially a part of the snout structure, and the skull is the skull, the overall bone in the head. To cut a very long story short, what they found is that most breeds of dog actually have very similar olfactory capabilities, regardless of whether they're a pug, or a Labrador, or a Labradoodle, or a bloodhound, or a border collie. It doesn't really matter that much. But if you take all dogs in general and compare them against wolves, you find that wolves are better equipped with their sense of smell. So, dogs have incredibly powerful senses of smell, such that it can even be useful in our medical science, but they're still a little bit less capable in this area than their wolf ancestors. It has been suggested that this disparity has something to do with domestication. We as humans rely on vision and sight for almost everything. And if you look at our traffic lights, our computer screens, the books that we read, the signs that we put up, the lights that we put in our houses and our cities, almost everything that we do in our day-to-day life is vision-based. Our sense of smell is kind of an afterthought. We sort of only use it if we are like smelling our food, or if something is imminently dangerous to us, like a hazardous chemical, for example. But dogs rely on their sense of smell for everything traditionally. So for them to adapt to our world and our way of life when we took them in, they might have adapted themselves to be a little bit more reliant on their vision. Which leads me directly into my next point, which is the role of sight. How do dogs see? And it's generally understood that dogs have a fairly powerful sense of vision compared to other animals and other mammals of their type, but it's also a commonly held belief that dogs are red-green colorblind. kind of in the sense that some humans are red-green colorblind, and that in general the eyesight of dogs is worse than ours because of the aforementioned reliance on smell. But how much of that is really true? Has anyone actually studied it? Well, as it turns out, yes, someone has. Sinishalchi et al. Developed an experiment specifically designed to test the color vision of dogs. Essentially, they would train a dog to select a certain rewarded color, usually red or green, as presented on a display. Many other aspects of the experiment, such as the brightness and the location of the tested color, were varied throughout the various trials that they ran so that they could be ruled out as variables. They worked it down to where, most likely, it was a color-based cue that the dogs were picking up on. Ultimately, they used 16 different dogs and ran the experiment hundreds of different ways, and what they came up with is that dogs can actually distinguish between red and green a lot better than we previously thought. They still can't do it as well as we can, but they certainly do it better than a colorblind human could. But color is far from the most important aspect of vision. All you need to do to know that is watch an old black and white movie. So what about visual acuity? That is, resolution, precision, how well a dog can see things. Well, this was studied back in 2017 by Lind et al., who used a very well-respected vision test method called the Archer Bow test. This is a test that has been used on both animals and humans traditionally, and it essentially runs like this. The subject is shown two different images. One is a solid gray field, and the other is a series of white and black bars. The series of white and black bars is gradually made finer and finer so that it more and more closely resembles the gray field, and thus makes it a lot more difficult to distinguish. The subject is then asked, or in the case of dogs, trained, to identify the striped image as compared to the gray one. Lind et al. Performed this experiment in both highlight and low light settings to simulate daytime and twilight. Somewhat surprisingly, the dogs also fared a lot better in this test than previous literature might have suggested. Old literature suggested that dogs had significantly worse visual acuity, but this particular study used a much more modern and much better refined method for its testing. Just to give you a little bit of a frame of reference and some idea of what all this actually means, some of the dogs demonstrated visual acuity comparable to our peripheral vision, like looking out the side of our eyes. Additionally, they did perform better in high light conditions, which was to be expected. The overall lesson here, though, is that dogs appear to have better vision all around than we previously thought. And this could very well be tied to domestication syndrome, as previously suggested. But again, that's just a speculative hypothesis. Finally, let's discuss the third most important sense, the sense of hearing. Now, just based off of their appearance with those big ears, it's not hard to infer that dogs likely have excellent hearing. But this inference is kind of vague, so what does scientific literature actually say on the matter? Well, lucky for us, Barber et al. Already did a lot of the work for us by compiling a whole bunch of this data in a 2020 review that had an eye for comparing dogs' hearing directly to ours. Sounds perfect for our cases. They reference all manner of material, covering audio sensitivity, frequency range, sound localization, and so on, but overall, the current state of the science suggests a few more specific things about dogs' hearing. First of all, dogs can hear a much higher range of frequencies than humans can. In fact, the highest end of their range can be up to 3 times our highest end. They also have better audio sensitivity than we do, especially at those high frequencies. A lot of this has to do with the shape of their ears, which is designed to pick up a lot of sound, and it even varies between different breeds, as sometimes the ears are rigid, other times they're floppy, shaped differently, which just allows different degrees of hearing based on how sound is funneled into the ear. Additionally, the way a dog's brain processes sound is different than the way a human's brain does. This is so that they can put together a more complete and canine-focused view of the world around them. Overall, it is reasonable to conclude that dogs do indeed have better hearing than us, except maybe in a few low-frequency settings. They can hear higher pitches in greater detail from further away, which helps them to build an enhanced picture of the world around them, as they deem important. After all, back in the wild, dogs and wolves would have had to hunt and pick up on the slightest noise of potential prey from very far away. So it makes sense that their hearing would continue to be well developed. There's no real reason for them to de-emphasize it by living with us, as we use hearing a lot too. So, Taking all of this study together, we can clearly see that dogs are truly remarkable creatures that can use their very well-developed senses to build a detailed picture of the world around them and where they are. Smell is of course highly important to them, if not the most important. Vision is surprisingly more significant to them than we might have previously thought, and their hearing is built for picking up on the slightest noise from very far away, sometimes noises that we as humans aren't even aware exist. So, dogs are incredible creatures, and this is a very exciting field of study. It could teach us a lot about the way our dogs live, where they came from, how they got to be the way they are, and the effects that domestication has had on them, especially since we can compare them against wolves. My sources are on the screen now, and they're also linked in the description below. I highly recommend looking up these articles for yourself, as there is a lot of fascinating scientific detail in there that I simply did not have time for in this video. If you enjoyed this, please feel free to give this video a like, and if you have a dog yourself, I hope that I've given you a renewed appreciation for the way they see the world. This is Caspian Thompson, signing off.